Hello, thank you for having me today and welcome to the Small Farmers Conference. My name is Jeremy Sandifer. I'm an extension person with Kentucky State University, College of Agriculture, Community, and the Sciences. And today we'll be talking about applied geospatial technology that can be used for the monitoring of small-scale farm and managed land areas. The agenda for the presentation, very briefly, I'll introduce the Applied Technology Working Group, which is the group that binds most of us that work on these topics. I'll very briefly touch on STEM and geospatial education at Kentucky State University, as education lies at the heart of all that we do. I'll go over some of the key technology that we use, primarily GIS, remote sensing, and drone technology. And then lastly, I'll close with some examples of recent projects that we've did, and hopefully these will serve to inspire you to want to work with us and do some of these things at your farm or your managed area. So the Applied Technology Working Group is a relatively new group in cooperative extension. It was formed simply to give context and give a home to these applied geospatial projects. We work with farmers and extension agents and students. Of course, myself, Jeremy Sandifer, but also work very closely with Mr. William Rogers, who's an extension outreach person and does a lot with drone and advanced sensors. And of course, we have Ms. Cynthia Rice, who's a researcher in agriculture and the environment, and is also an expert in developing web resources and compiling those in certain places. And of course, where would we be without the leadership, extension research objectives? Dr. Courtney Owens, our interim associate extension administrator, and Dr. Budi Gilwali, who is the lead scientist for the Center for Geospatial Intelligence and Environmental Security. So at Kentucky State University, as I mentioned, education lies at the heart of all that we do. And all of the projects that we do on behalf of agents or small farmers in the community, they almost always involve students in some degree. The students, first of all, get the experience just to see what all's going on in the world. So they get to see the real life applications of this technology, solving problems for our stakeholders. We do lots of summer programs, and we do lots of outreach to different K-12 schools and create projects that just create an environment where the students can learn in real time what we do with this geospatial stuff. And across the bottom here, I simply have some of the unofficial partners that we have. These are the people who work at the government agencies who may be responsible for this kind of work, or other private industries who just make a business on doing this kind of work. And they provide the opportunities and the potential career pathways for our students later on. Just briefly, some pictures here of the various activities that take place in our learning programs. You can see we have a great diversity of students, and we find ourselves in lots of different situations. So what is geospatial, period? What kind of data is that? Well, here's a figure that tries to illustrate that. Geographic Information System is essentially a representation of all the data that makes clear what's in our real world. So you have a lot of experience with this, whether you know it or not. Lots of maps clearly depict city boundaries, state boundaries, county boundaries. But if you zoom in a little bit, even within the city, parts of the city can be broken up into parcels or land use districts or that kind of thing. It's just a label to give meaning to a piece of land. But further, you can describe this land by the type of topography that it has, being the elevation or the type of vegetation that's present there, the various roads that are in the area, the different vegetation or animal paths that may be there. But the point is, all the various layers are there to try to represent as accurately as possible the real world. Directly connected to that is the science of remote sensing. And remote sensing is basically what you do with your phone every time you take a picture. So we're simply measuring sunlight that's reflected from the Earth's surface. And primarily we do this in the visible range, just as your brain does when you're looking around at the world. But we also have advanced sensors that allow us to see parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that the eye is not sensitive to. And we're able to use this information to get an idea of what the real physical composition is of the surface that's being imaged, be it plants or materials or whatever. So to zoom in just a little bit and how this really applies to the agriculture sector. So on the left-hand side here, you have a small cross-section of a leaf. And if you look at the colored arrows, what that is representing are the different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, or different bands of light, are interacting with the plant leaf. And as the figure shows, the red and the blue energy is predominantly absorbed by the plant material, because this is how the plant does photosynthesis. The green and the near-infrared light is efficiently reflected away. And that's represented here in this chart. So along the x-axis on the bottom, you have the different bands of light, blue, green, red, and infrared. The black line represents a healthy plant. So as you can see, its red and blue reflectance levels are very low because that energy is being consumed as part of photosynthesis. A less healthy plant, conversely, is reflecting more of that energy because it's not needed for photosynthesis. This could be due to pest or disease or simply lack of water. But the way that the various bands are reflected, that information can be expressed in the form of an equation. And you get a simple value, 0 to 1. A value approaching 0, as shown on the right-hand side, is a plant that's not realizing its full potential in terms of photosynthesis. The plant on the left has a much higher value and so is doing a much better job of effectively using that light for photosynthesis. So we'll say it's healthier. Now, these kind of measurements are being made all the time. And NASA, for example, has lots of different missions that are constantly, all the time, going around the Earth, taking pictures, and some places of the Earth may be visited multiple times a day. And all of this information can be compiled and stitched together to make essentially a model that shows, in this case, the annual variation of the greening up of the vegetation and then the dying back down. So you could see clearly in the land masses, as the season progresses, the forests, they get greener and fuller. But also look at the oceans. Look how much vegetation is growing in the water. That's essentially where most of our oxygen comes from. So this is monitored all the time. And we can use this information to monitor individual farms. We also have, if a satellite is a coarse scale, always looking view, the drone allows something very different. The drone allows us to see in very high resolution exactly what's happening at the farm and even the crop level. So here, this just shows a single image, a near-infrared image that shows the distribution of how light is being reflected. And using that same equation I showed you just a little bit earlier, we're able to create time series that show us how the vegetation is progressing on the various fields. We can also do this same type of exercise using the satellite data to look at larger areas. So where if before we were looking at variation in a given field, here we can look at many fields at once and look at the variation across a given county, say. And all this information is then compiled into what we call a decision support system. So the total representation of the farmer's land, of their operation, of the expansion plans that they have, and the expert knowledge that they possess because of their long experience at that land. All of this information is combined in an effort to try to help the farmer or the land manager make better decisions moving forward. Connected to that, we can also help farmers and land managers with different aspects that are connected to this. So if a farmer wanted to get going and do their own drone programs. There's a lot of legal and safety stuff that needs to be situated and taken care of, and we can offer some help with that. Further, we can help farmers access the tools that are needed to be able to characterize the airspace in their area so that you can fly drones safely and legally. And we could also help you with the various applications that are needed to be able to actually implement drone jobs for your own project. So that brings me to the end of the introduction to the various pieces of technology that we do. And we'll take the rest of the time and I'll just show you a couple of recent examples, most of it student-involved work that simply highlights a use of the technology to solve some problem on the farm. So the example we're looking at here, this is the KSU Research and Demonstration Farm. It's just short of 400 acres, comprised of many different sections that have a lot of different competing objectives going on. The section that I've highlighted here is the organic section. So we fly the drones a lot in the organic section because of the great variety of stuff that they have in the ground. It allows us an opportunity to see lots of different things and see how our technology responds to the various kinds of crops. In this particular example, we have corn and different varieties of hemp and pasture that may have goat rotations or no rotations, various types of soy and sunflower. And the question was, over the course of a growing season, say for 1 month time, we wanted to know how the productivity of these different crops changed. So we're questioning here not just the type of crop, but we're actually looking at the individual crops within each plot. So here, as I've described the NDVI equation just a little earlier, so this is time 1 and time 2 NDVI map showing the productivity. So the more green the area, the more active the photosynthesis at the time the image was taken. And if you simply take the difference between the two time steps, the difference that you're left with is the real-time change in productivity from time 1 to time 2. Likewise, if we're only interested in the crop heights or the mass of the biomass that's growing there, we can also derive the 3D nature of the ground, time 1 and time 2, and again take the difference between them, and the difference shows us what the increase in crop height is from when we took the first image to when we took the second image. And again, you can see not only per plot how well the plot is growing, but you can see the variation within the plot down to the individual crop level. Another example that's just west of there, the central part of the farm, they do a lot of goat rotational grazing there. And this particular project that's just getting going, it involves looking at how the goat behavior, so how the goats are rotated and how they spend their time on each different part of the plot. We want to understand how that impacts the vegetation that's growing there in that area. So for all those various plots, they're all on like a week schedule, and the goats get moved from paddock to paddock to paddock to paddock over time. And over time, we're monitoring how the vegetation is changing under that. So here I have just a series of images that are just meant to highlight the variability within each given plot. So in a lot of cases, we manage according to the plot, but this technology, it's such high resolution that if we have the appetite for it, we can monitor down to the individual level. And then further, once assessing how well the goats are treating the grass or whatever the objectives are of the goat people, we then can go back to the areas and do ground truthing to try to find out how the variation in the image aligns to what we know is there on the ground. So we go and we do ground samples for the various parts of the image, and then we're able to feed this information into the GIS, and the GIS is then able to recognize the occurrence of these same crops. this is probably one of the most important aspects. The imagery is great and it looks great, but without proper ground information, it's not very useful. So zooming away from the farm just a little bit, we also work in a lot of woodland settings. So here in Kentucky, one of the problems we have is an invasive species called the emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer burrows into the bark, and it can damage the moisture transportation and nutrient transportation systems of the tree. Over time, that can cause damage to the tree, and the tree starts to fall apart and then eventually dies to some kind of a secondary issue. Once the tree dies and falls out of the canopy's then left with this huge hole in the top where now light is able to pass through the canopy and reach the forest floor. And at this particular part where we took this information, they were really interested in what kind of successive activities take place once these ash trees fall out. So using machine learning along with our drones, we're able to photograph the entire area and then run a series of classifications that then give us a map to show us where all of the new gaps are. And then that team is able to use that information and then pick which parts of the park or which canopy gaps they want to go spend their time investigating. Also in a forest setting, a slightly different constituent. These are maple syrup producers. So they have these massive maple tree farms, and they're connected with a series of tubes and hose. And during the winter, only when the conditions are exactly right, the tree will start to release the sap. Sap flows down to collection drums, and then it's further processed into syrup. The question for us was, how might the season be changing over time in response to climate change? So we know that the climate is constantly shifting, but the question is what does climate change look like at this particular operation? So to answer that, we've installed a series of climate stations that are there during the growing season to monitor changes in the air temperature so that we can get an idea of how the season may be changing, and then further how those changes may ultimately impact the particular operations of collecting the sap. Another woodland example, the last example that I'll share here, we also serve a lot of outside agents for various other projects that they do. So there's a large interest right now in the use of goats to go and clean out woodland areas. So as you can see here on the left, about 10 goats were introduced to about 7 acres of land that was highly thick brush. It was almost hard to see through, as you can see on the left. Well, in about 3 weeks' time, the goats had essentially eaten out the entire 6 feet bottom of this whole forest area over the whole 7 acres. They just decimated everything. And our purpose of being out there was to try to quantify, using our drone tech, how much vegetation they had taken out of there. And we're still working on that, but certainly you can see how effective the goats are at clearing out the land. And of course, the images are doing a good job of capturing that, even if it's not quantified in a very scientific manner. Everything that we do is very expensive. All the students we involve, there's tuition involved. We have to pay people, we have to travel, we need equipment. We're constantly repairing stuff, and it all takes a tremendous effort. We get a lot of funding from the National Science Foundation and the United States Department of Agriculture, and we just simply couldn't do the work without them. I hope we covered some material today that you find interesting. And again, if you were inspired by anything that you see, please reach out to me and we'll see how we can help you. Thank you.